And welcome everybody to another edition of Beneath the Surface and our series on refuting the nonsense and reclaiming the truth, which is my one of my latest books. And with me today is Father Anthony Blount from the diocese. Well, actually, he works in the Archdiocese of Detroit and is a SALT priest. That's Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity. Father Anthony, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. Nice to see you.
You too. Haven't seen you in a while.
Been a while.
Yeah. So we're going to, as we are doing in this series, we're taking one chapter at a time in this book, which is basically a refutation of the way that the world thinks and a clarification of a church teaching in the process. And it's called, again, Refuting the Nonsense and Reclaiming the Truth, One Socratic Dialogue at a Time. And the reason it's mentioned that is because it's a book of simply 73 dialogues and of people talking back and forth at each other or with each other. And in this chapter 4, Father Anthony and I are going to go over the chapter on abortion and the arguments for and against. And Father, you read this chapter before coming on today?
Yes.
Yes. So do you have any thoughts off the top of your head to start with?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of good reasoning, natural law reasoning, they call it sometimes, going on. I mean, with the main character, Sophia, I like her name very much.
Means wisdom, of course.
Yes. A really good conversation with her and Richie. There was one other dialogue towards the end with two other people, but Richie and Sophia have very good conversations. And I get Sophia's point, as her name indicates, wisdom is to show, basically, to use the gift of reason in a correct way to arrive at truths which one can arrive at through reason.
So let me stop you there. Mm-hmm. A lot of people might tune in and see a Catholic priest and think that we're talking about the Catholic faith and things that you cannot understand through human reason. You have to be, to grasp it, they need to be divinely revealed from above. But you're saying in these dialogues, you don't even have to necessarily be religious in order to follow them and see the wisdom articulated particularly by Sophia in these dialogues.
Yes, that's right. The great difficulty today, as John Paul II actually pointed out, oddly enough, is this: that the church, the Catholic Church, finds herself in this funny position of having to defend reason against attacks because it's not believed in anymore. And there's all kinds of abundant evidence around us about that. It'd be off the top to talk about, say, transgenderism or men and women's sports and things of this sort. But the church has to defend reason because reason is a gift from God. The problem is our society, has gotten far away from God himself in many ways. But the result of getting away from the spiritual realities is even to lose the gift of reason.
I want to stop you right there because this is so important. I always write that when we entered a post-Christian society, we entered a post-reason society. And, you can make the argument that Christ himself is reason incarnate, as the Gospel of John tells us. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, about the necessary connection between Christ, even if it's, I'm not even speaking about a conscious belief like Christians with faith have, but between Christ himself as the person through whom all things are made and the understanding of reality by God's creatures with intellect and free will. Is he in a sense the middleman, if you will, the mediator, not only between God and man, but between man's intellect and reality itself and understanding it?
Well, John Paul II said in his encyclical called Faith and Reason, that faith and reason are like two wings by which the human spirit flies upwards towards God.
Yeah.
And yeah, so reason, in order to be, what faith does is faith doesn't harm reason, it purifies reason. And I think it allows reason to become fully itself. Because, you know, reason I think there's a connection between the reason and what is infinite ultimately. And we can't reach that without faith.
Right.
So, yeah, so at any rate, I'm not sure if I'm getting at what you were
Well,
saying, but
well, but all of these newer, for lack of a better term, woke, but I tend to think they're more insane than woke movements in our contemporary society in the past even just dozen years. They're so unreasonable that there seems to be a supernatural dimension to people not able to use their natural human reason anymore.
well, yes, because as you were saying about Christ, we're getting away from creation. When you get away from, this is the difficulty. We're getting away from the Creator, and when you get that's what's happening, Paul. Is that and yeah, you can't go in this direction when you try to act as if God did not exist with all your might and try to reduce everything to materialism, the things of this sort, just material things. It falters. It doesn't work. It actually isn't reasonable. So
What's the motivation behind doing this?
the motivation would be that it's always been a false sense of freedom.
Yeah.
The idea that, yeah, it's really a misunderstanding of what freedom is all about. Freedom is a great gift from God, but it's being totally misunderstood as, the freedom of arbitrariness, the freedom to do whatever comes into my mind,
Yeah.
regardless of there's no restraint. You know,
And grasping this false freedom seems to a motive for grasping this seems to be pleasure and power, doesn't it? It seems people think that they'll be able to grab more pleasure and more power by following this false freedom rather than by allowing the intellect to enable us to see reality as it is, which might once in a while require sacrifice.
yeah, the difficulty is that you have it has to do with, believe it or not, with Friedrich Nietzsche, all of these things. That the idea that you go beyond good, if we get beyond good and evil, which is what our society is trying to do, beyond good and evil, then you come to this idea that the Superman, so, that seems, or the will to power. So I have to, that's kind of what's going on in our society, which has really lost its mind in that sense.
Yeah,
That,
those two things seem to go together: the will to power and losing touch with reality. And we see that in the contemporary left today, the cultural left.
yeah, it's really dictatorial. It's really really problematic.
Yeah.
So the gift of reason, as you were saying earlier, yeah, you're right that it is beautiful how Christianity talks so much about reason and understanding more than anything else on earth. The Christian religion is always talking about that because it's based. We would say that this is how radical it is with Christianity when it comes to understanding and reason. We would say that before all things else, there was understanding. That before all things, there was wisdom, there was understanding. And that all things came to be precisely because of understanding and wisdom. So if the universe is so understandable and intelligible,
Mm.
astoundingly so, it's because it was made with understanding in the first place.
Now, in the liturgy, it says, "Through him, with him, in him." That's what you're saying. Sort of makes sense in as much as all of creation was created through him, with him, and is in him. So if you're not connected, even subconsciously, to him, if you're running away from him, then you'll be unable to understand reality, the creation itself, which includes you and I, which brings us to our topic today, chapter 4, human life. It disables people from understanding the meaning and value of human life, and hence we have an abortion culture that kills a third of all people that God creates.
Yeah. Again, that is the will to power is a really big thing here, and it's unfortunately it's the attempt, as you know, at justification to justify things that are convenient for my understanding of freedom. They're convenient in that sense, but we're making such a big mistake because they're harmful. They're really harmful to everyone involved. And for instance, in this especially with abortion, as priests know, perhaps more than anyone else knows, the harm of abortion and what this causes in people's lives and in society itself. It's, as you were saying, what you're getting at is unreasonable. It makes no sense. It has zero logic or reason to it. And this is a difficulty. It's the separation of freedom from truth, which it doesn't end up in a good place. That's what's happening. The separation of freedom from truth is what abortion certainly is about.
And you do that by denying that there is objective truth. And that's how they're able to justify this or rationalize it in their minds.
And one way or another, you have to do something like that.
Yeah. And of course, objective truth is and emanates from he who is.
Yes, ultimately, Christians would say, and it is correct, that and the ancient Greeks understood this without being Christians or Jews
Yeah.
or anything else, and that ultimately, right, we would say truth is actually that amazing that it's actually someone. It's
Yeah.
not. It's that overwhelming, and that we would get to say that wisdom precedes all things, and that's why there are all things. And this is a critical reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, there in the chapter 4 of Refuting the Nonsense, there are 8 dialogues. And I'm sure you've been familiar with how these dialogues go because we've heard them for the past 40, 50 years.
Yes.
Are there any that stand out to you as either the most common or the most unreasonable, or anything that any of the common arguments that might stand out to you for any reason?
Well, there were many.
Mm.
There were, as you know, those dialogues in chapter 4. It's all language you've all heard before.
Yeah.
Those arguments are used frequently. And it's sometimes rather a little bit innocent misunderstandings. We just kind of gulp down. We live in this ambiance of this culture, and you
Yeah.
adopt it without even thinking or even knowing you're doing it. But one of the questions was about it's a little more involved, but the question about rape and incest, the famous,
Yeah.
as we all know,
Exceptions.
they don't talk about it as much anymore because things have gotten actually worse than that. but use the rape, that whole argument was used certainly when you and I were roommates in Tampa, Florida, in our 20s, right? That was the big argument. That was one of those arguments. Always the rape argument or these
Yeah.
horrible. Now, as it says in the book there in the dialogue, first of all, as we approach that difficult subject, it is difficult. It's heartbreaking and
Yeah. Of
difficult. Okay, we know that
course.
horrible.
Of course.
But the first thing to say is that basically 99% of the difficulty with abortion has nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. This is only about 1 or 2% of all abortions, on
yeah,
the millions and millions.
right. And
Yeah.
they're horrible, but it would be
Yeah.
unjust for someone to take the problem with these awful circumstances that are rare and say, therefore, all abortions are somehow fall under this. That's
I've
ridiculous.
I very often when that has come up in my real life discussions, I very often say, Okay, before we talk about rape and incest, are you willing to have illegal all the other 99% of the abortions that occur? I mean, say yes to that, and we'll talk about these exceptions. And of course, they don't, because it's really a ruse to basically say, well, if this 1 or 2% of abortions, then all of them. So
It,
you're right. You're
it's
right.
a ruse. It's a ruse. But yeah, and of course now in these awful circumstances, which actually a priest deals with such things anyway in real life, but in these terrible circumstances, as the book rightly says, and people have often noticed this, and women will tell you this, abortion is not a solution for something. It simply isn't a solution to anything. And not only is it not a solution, it causes immense problems, immense difficulties. Obviously, the difficulty of a human life being taken away, extinguished, but also the woman isn't helped by this in any fashion whatsoever. And how could anyone possibly think this? It's suffering a double trauma instead of one trauma. And at any rate, women have even said, and I've heard them say it, that this child who was conceived in a way that was not intended and perhaps was quite difficult and terrible, perhaps even, this child is a gift from God, and it's so obvious to them now how the child is a blessing despite these difficulties, these awful things.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are awful, heart-rending things that are brought up. Number one, they're not what's going on, and at least 99% of the abortions that happen in this country are not brought on
Right.
by this context, and everyone knows this.
Yeah.
But the second thing is, abortion is never a solution to any problem. It can't be. The taking of this little life is not a solution. In fact, I know personally, this is a fact, that those kinds of things like abortion cause only harm and no good.
Well, like you said, two wrongs don't make a right. Two grievous harms to the human person don't make it better, or it doesn't heal. It just compounds the woundedness. And as Socrates once said, it's much better to receive injustice than to bring about an injustice. And so, as horrible as rape is to anybody, it's actually worse to rape rather than to be raped. And
Yes.
in this case, it's actually worse to kill the human being conceived in rape rather than to be raped. So, the church, the world, everybody should do what they can to help a person in crisis in a situation like this. But like you said, their woundedness will be compounded greatly if they choose to kill their preborn child.
Right. They're not
Yeah.
healed. They're actually harmed. And as you know, look, I know as a priest, having dealt with countless numbers of abortions, not it doesn't happen about because of rape. It just simply isn't the fact. It just does not
Well,
what's going on.
let's face it, it's mostly the result of fornication, is it not?
Is the result of fornication in almost every case,
Yeah.
almost, without
Yeah, I
exception.
mean, we need to do a whole show on our fornication culture that began, as a result of the birth control pill. But that's another show. But you were saying,
Yeah. Sometimes it happens in marriages, to
yeah,
be honest with you, too.
right,
Unfortunately, it's quite
right.
painful and difficult. But mostly it's outside of marriage. That's what's going on.
Mm.
And
And by having the position of I'm against abortion except for rape, incest, and life of the mother. And by the way, we can talk about this notion of life of the mother in a moment. But to have that position, that philosophical position, basically what you're saying is those human beings that are created in these particular ways aren't worth as much as other human beings that aren't created in those ways.
well, you can't have it as a philosophical position. Like you said, I think
Hmm.
at the beginning of the dialogues, as a political position, I can see where you might want to, what they call
Incrementalism.
incrementalism,
Yeah.
because you're trying to arrive at the greatest possible good
Right.
in a very trying, unbelievable situation. So if you can get
Right.
getting any lives saved is better than getting no lives saved. So
Yeah.
you do what you can,
But there are a lot of people that have it as their own philosophical position that these particular human beings don't deserve to live, which violates not only faith but reason. It makes no sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make it's not it doesn't make any sense. Um, yeah, I'm not sure all the reasoning that's going on there or the lack of it. I mean, but it's something. It seems like it's almost like as if they're saying that the end justifies the means. It's more like that. In other words, they're saying that
Mhm.
since I know it's wrong, but the life of the mother is so precious. Therefore, this seems to me that you can do this for this end, and
Mm,
that's a classical moral mistake.
yeah,
Uh, I mean, it's a delicate thing. It's a hard thing for people to sometimes comprehend that the end does not actually justify the means.
yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
mean, Scripture says that you can never do what is evil in order that good might come out of it, right?
right, right, and I think that's where they're coming from sometimes. Like some people, at any rate, when they say these things about the health of the mother, life of the mother, it's almost that they have a notion. I have this sense they have the notion this really isn't a positive thing,
Mm,
but still, this other positive thing outweighs this really unpositive thing, and
yeah,
they're making a sort of a weighing of consequences or something like that. And anyway, we can't do that when it comes to humanity, to human beings.
yeah. Now, the notion of the life of the mother exception, there really isn't a an instance where the mother's life would be spared that you would have to perform a direct abortion. And what people don't understand is that there's a world of a difference morally between direct abortion and surgery in order to save a woman's life with when the death of the child is not intended. And these kinds of indirect abortions can be weighed by the principle of double effect in circumstances in which, for example, the fallopian tube is impregnated, tubal pregnancies where both parties will die unless something will probably die unless something happens here, and the notion of you can't directly kill the child because that would be abortion. However, you can remove the diseased part of the fallopian tube where the intention there is to save the mother's life, at least one life would be saved. The intention is not to kill the child, even though the child's life will probably be ended. So, you know, people don't understand the difference between those things. Do you wanna comment on that a little?
I think you said it rather well. I mean, the principle of double effect that, yeah, for instance, normally a couple would be one is a different subject would be
Yeah,
open to they want them to they should be open to life as a married couple,
right,
but sometimes a woman has problems, and oftentimes with her uterus, and things have to be done, like the removal of the uterus to save her. And it's not her intention never to have children, but
right.
she ends up not ever being able to have children. She didn't will that. What was willed was her health.
So what was willed and intended is the saving of her life, her health. But what indirectly occurred from that is her never having children again.
Permanent sterility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if you did that, if you intended that,
Now, if you didn't, if you, yeah,
that
right,
would be a
exactly.
sin. Yeah,
If
that would
you,
be a moral evil.
right, but it happened exactly. But you're not intending that whatsoever, and that would apply to abortion also on those strange, those very rare occasions it can happen where, yeah, for an operation is performed to save someone's life, and an unintended consequence would be the death of this little person.
Okay.
Completely unintended consequence. That's a pretty rare thing, but it's possible.
Okay. Looks like Zoom is telling me we only have a couple minutes left. This has been an interesting conversation. We a lot of these arguments, and of course that's one argument, but there are seven other arguments too that you can find in chapter 4 of Refuting the Nonsense and Reclaiming the Truth, one Socratic dialogue at a time. And that's only one out of 10 chapters that cover the whole gamut of truth and morality in America today. So you can find it on Amazon.com. So I think you should take a look. I think you'd like it. Any last word, Father Anthony?
Well, Paul, I like your defense of standing up for the gift of reason. That seems to be your forte. And yeah, in this confusing world, which is
Yes.
really annihilating reason for other ends. What a mistake! It's a
Yeah.
great gift we've been given by God to be. We want to use it to its truly. We want to use it well, and that's not always easy.
Well, the thing is, and this is what God tells us clearly through scripture and tradition, that if you use it well, you will live well. You will be the H word. You cannot be happy unless you're living in accord with the objective truth of our being.
And I would add at the end, though, that faith and reason, the way they work together, okay, it's just that faith and reason do not contradict each other.
Oh gosh, no.
And this is what has led to this actually.
Yeah.
And this
And
whole
throw in science too. Faith, reason, and science complement each other.
right, and but the idea that faith, reason, and science were against one another, especially reason and science against faith, and all of this, has actually led to this situation we're in right now.
Right.
Because reason divorced completely from faith, as if it were an enemy of faith, has led to the impoverishment of reason to an extraordinary degree.
Bingo. Bingo. Couldn't have said it better. Father Anthony Blount, thank you very much for being on Beneath the Surface with us tonight.
Thank you, Paul.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. Again, you've been listening to another edition of Beneath the Surface. God bless you, and hope to see you next time.